I have $3.14. Is that enough for soup? The old woman asked it so softly that for one breath the entire restaurant forgot how to move. Outside, snow buried Pittsburgh beneath a white silence. Inside, Aurelia crystal glasses gleamed. Politicians laughed, and dangerous men ate beneath golden chandeliers. Then she stepped through the door in a torn green coat, wet shoes, and a medical bracelet that made Luca Moretti, the most feared mafia boss in the city, go completely still. This is not only a story about hunger. It is about the price of mercy, the weight of an old promise, and what happens when a man feared by everyone is forced to protect the one woman who refuses to fear him. Stay until the end, because every coin on that counter will matter. Like the video and comment where you are watching from. The coins were still shining on the marble when the two men from Blackridge crossed the room. Evelyn did not turn to look at them. She did not need to. Her shoulders had already tightened beneath the thin kitchen blanket, and the spoon in her hand had begun to tremble. The taller man stopped beside her chair. "There you are, Mrs. Parker. You gave everyone quite a scare." His voice was gentle in the way some people speak to children or to the dying. It was not kindness. It was control dressed in a softer coat. Grace stepped around the bar. "She is eating." The man barely looked at her. "She is confused. We need to take her back." Evelyn whispered, "No." The second man reached for her arm. Luca Moretti rose from his table. He did not move quickly. He never had to. The men seated around him fell silent before he took his first step. "Take your hand away from her." The Blackridge employee paused. "Mr. Moretti, this does not concern you." Luca stopped beside Evelyn. "That depends on what happens next." The man withdrew a card from his pocket. "We are authorized employees of Blackridge Senior Residence. Mrs. Parker suffers from cognitive decline. She wandered off during a power interruption." Evelyn stared at the soup. "They locked the doors," she said. The employee smiled as though she had confirmed his story. "You see what we are dealing with." Grace saw something else. A yellow bruise wrapped around Evelyn's wrist beneath the medical bracelet. The skin near her thumb had been rubbed raw. There was another bruise below her sleeve shaped like fingers. Luca saw it too. Did she receive those injuries while wandering? The man's smile disappeared. Older patients bruise easily. Older patients also say no. The second employee shifted his weight. His coat opened just enough to reveal a black baton clipped inside. Luca glanced at it, then at the man's face. The man closed his coat. "You are interfering with a lawful return," the taller employee said. "We can call the police." "Call them." The answer came so calmly that both men hesitated. Around the dining room, every conversation had stopped. They all knew Luca Moretti, and they knew he had never needed to raise his voice to make a room obey. The taller man looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Parker, come with us." She closed both hands around the bowl. Luca pulled out the chair beside her and sat. "She is not leaving tonight." The man took out his phone. "You have no legal authority to keep her." Luca rested one hand on the table. "Then bring someone who does." For several seconds, no one moved. The men finally backed away. At the door, the taller one looked over his shoulder. "You do not know what she is involved in." Luca met his gaze. "No, but I intend to." The door closed behind them. The cold followed for one brief breath, then disappeared. Evelyn watched the entrance. "They will come back with papers," she said. "What kind of papers?" Grace asked. "The kind that make kidnapping look respectable." Luca looked at her medical bracelet again. Evelyn Parker. The name had lived in a locked drawer above the restaurant for 13 years. Thomas Holloway had spoken it with blood filling his mouth. Find Evelyn Parker. She will know where Grace is. Luca had searched for her until every trail ended. 3 years earlier, an investigator had brought him a death record from Blackridge. Now the dead woman sat in his restaurant, saving bread in her coat. Luca lifted his eyes toward Grace. She stood near Evelyn with one hand on the back of the old woman's chair. Her expression held concern, anger, and the careful restraint of someone who had learned that showing too much fear invited the wrong kind of attention. Evelyn looked at her as if she had found something she had crossed the entire city to see. Luca noticed that too. "Close the restaurant," he said. The manager glanced toward the remaining guests. "Sir, now." Bills were settled, coats were collected, and the pianist closed the lid over the keys. Soon the dining room stood empty except for Luca, Grace, Evelyn, Matteo, Russo, and 4 men near the entrances. Grace carried Evelyn into the private dining room near the kitchen where the fire burned hotter. "I can walk," Evelyn protested. "I believe you," Grace said. "You are still letting me help." She found dry socks in an employee locker and filled a basin with warm water. When she removed Evelyn's wet shoes, the skin beneath them was pale and wrinkled. One heel had split open. A pressure wound darkened the side of her ankle. Grace's face changed. "Who has been treating this?" "No one. That can become infected. Everything becomes something there if you stay long enough." Grace cleaned the wound. Evelyn watched her hands. "You have your mother's hands," she said. Grace stopped. The room seemed to narrow around them. "My mother." Evelyn looked toward the open doorway. Luca stood in the hall, partly hidden by shadow. "Not here," she whispered. Grace followed her gaze. Luca did not pretend he had heard nothing. "Matteo," he said. "Upstairs." They climbed the private staircase to Luca's office. The room overlooked the river where snow moved sideways through the black air and the city lights trembled on the water. Matteo closed the door. "You know her. I know the name." Luca unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and removed an old envelope. One corner was stained dark brown. Matteo had seen many things in Luca's office. He had never seen that. Luca unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting slanted sharply across the page. "If I do not make it, find Evelyn Parker. She knows where Marianne took Grace. Keep my little girl away from our life." Matteo read it twice. "Thomas Holloway." Luca said nothing. Thomas had pushed Luca through a warehouse exit while bullets tore through the windows, then gone back to slow the men coming down the corridor. Luca still remembered him on the concrete floor, his shirt black with blood. He remembered promising. He remembered failing. Evelyn was listed as dead, Matteo said. At Blackridge. You think the record was forged? I think a woman who was declared dead just asked me for soup. Matteo looked through the office window toward the dining room below, and Grace Luca followed his gaze. Grace was kneeling beside Evelyn, wrapping her ankle with clean gauze. I do not know. You are thinking it. I said I do not know. Matteo let the silence remain. Luca folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Find everything on Blackridge. Ownership doctors, attorneys, court filings, police calls, deaths. Start with Evelyn Parker. I want to know who declared her incompetent and who declared her dead. And if both signatures belong to the same people, Luca closed the drawer. Then we find out how many other dead people are still breathing. Downstairs, Grace helped Evelyn settle near the fire. The old woman ate slowly now. Her first hunger had passed, leaving exhaustion in its place. Why did you come here? Grace asked. Evelyn looked at the flames. I knew the address. That is not what I asked. No. Grace sat across from her. You knew my mother. Evelyn folded the blanket more tightly around herself. I knew a woman named Marianne Bennett a long time ago. Grace's breath caught. My mother was Marianne Bennett. I know. How Evelyn's eyes filled, but she looked toward the door again. I need to be certain first. Certain of what? that he is still the man your father believed he could become. Grace turned. Luca stood at the end of the room. He had heard that sentence. Evelyn did not apologize. For the first time that night, the old woman looked less frightened than tired. "Blackridge is not a home," she said. "It is a place where people are turned into paperwork." Luca entered and took the chair beside the fire. "Tell me." Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. "They choose people with no one close enough to ask questions. Widows, men whose children live across the country, women whose families have not called in years. They tell the court we are confused. A doctor signs a paper. A guardian takes control of the pension, the bank account, the house." Grace's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "What happens to the house? It is sold. To whom companies with different names? The same men come to collect the keys," Luca asked. "And the residents? Some complain. Then their medicine changes." The fire cracked between them. Evelyn continued. "They sleep through breakfast, then lunch. Some stop speaking. Some stop waking up." Grace thought of the pressure wound, the bruises, the hidden bread. "Why did you not call anyone?" "We did. They took the telephone from the common room after Mr. Whitaker called his daughter. They said he became agitated." "What happened to him?" "He died 3 days later." Luca's face did not change, but the room felt colder. Evelyn looked down at her hands. "I started pretending I could not remember. When they asked questions, I stared at the wall. When they spoke in front of me, I let my mouth hang open. People say terrible things when they believe an old woman has already disappeared." Grace leaned closer. "What did you hear?" Before Evelyn could answer, Matteo appeared at the door. "We have company." A black sedan stood outside Aurelia. Behind it waited a marked police vehicle. Conrad Vane entered first. He wore a charcoal overcoat, polished shoes, and the calm expression of a man accustomed to arriving after others had prepared the room for him. Captain Aaron Pike followed with a uniformed officer and a woman carrying a leather document case. Conrad removed his gloves. "Mr. Moretti." Luca remained near the fire. "Mr. Vane." Grace knew the name from advertisements that promised comfort, dignity, and beautiful gardens. Conrad looked exactly like the promise. Warm, expensive, carefully composed. Conrad looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Parker, everyone has been worried sick." Evelyn gripped Grace's hand. Conrad noticed. "You must be Grace Bennett." Grace did not ask how he knew. The woman with the case opened it and handed papers to Luca. "Emergency guardianship order," she said. "Mrs. Parker has been declared unable to make independent medical and residential decisions. Blackridge is authorized to return her to supervised care." Luca read the first page. A judge had signed it. A medical report described Evelyn as paranoid, confused, and prone to dangerous wandering. "She appears to know where she is," Luca said. Conrad smiled with professional sadness. "Lucid intervals are common." Evelyn stood too quickly and nearly lost her balance. "He is lying." Conrad turned toward her. "Please, sit down, Evelyn. Do not speak to me like that. You are upset. I am angry." Captain Pike stepped forward. "Mr. Moretti interfering with this order could be considered unlawful restraint." Luca looked at him. Whose restraint, Pike's jaw tightened. Conrad moved closer, lowering his voice as though offering Luca a courtesy. "You own restaurants, warehouses, construction companies. You have influence in places where influence is useful. But you do not own this woman." Luca handed the papers to Matteo. "That is where we differ." Conrad's expression changed by less than an inch. "I do not believe anyone owns her." The room held still. Grace expected a threat. She expected Luca to order the doors locked or the police removed. Instead, he turned to Matteo. "Call Mercer." Matteo was already dialing. A civil rights attorney named Helen Mercer reviewed the papers by video call. The order had been signed without an independent interview with Evelyn. Helen filed an immediate challenge and obtained a temporary stay until the following evening. Captain Pike received the notice on his phone. His face hardened. Conrad remained calm. 24 hours, he said. Luca looked at Evelyn. That is enough for tonight. Conrad put on his gloves. At the entrance, he stopped beside Grace. Your mother owed a great deal of money before she died. Grace felt the blood leave her face. Conrad continued toward the door. Luca's voice stopped him. You speak to her again without permission, and papers will not be the only thing waiting for you. Conrad looked back. There you are. Then he left. Grace turned on Luca. What did he mean? I do not know. That answer seems convenient in this building. Luca studied her. I will find out. I did not ask you to. No. Then do not make my life one of your investigations. Evelyn watched them with an expression neither noticed. By morning the storm had weakened, but the streets remained buried. Grace left through the kitchen entrance after refusing Luca's offer of a driver. A gray sedan followed her to Mount Washington. Near her apartment, Neil Barlow stepped from the passenger side with a folder beneath his arm. You missed another payment. I sent what I had. What you had is not what you owe. Your mother signed the loan during your father's final hospitalization. Her death did not end the interest. A second man stepped from the car. Before Grace could answer, a black SUV turned the corner. Two of Luca's men got out and stood silently on the sidewalk. Barlow looked at them. This does not concern Moretti. Then contact me through proper channels, Grace said. Barlow returned to his car. This debt is not going away. When the sedan disappeared, Grace faced Luca's men. Take me back to Aurelia. Luca was in his office when Grace entered without knocking. You had me followed. He closed the file before him. You were threatened. That is not an answer. Yes. I had you followed. You do not get to put guards around me because you feel guilty about something you have not explained. I did not place them there because of guilt. Then why? Because Conrad knew your name and your mother's debts. 2 hours later, men were waiting outside your apartment. I have handled debt collectors before. That does not make them harmless. It does not make me yours. The words remained between them. Luca rose, but he did not approach her. You are right. She had prepared for resistance. Agreement disarmed her. I should have asked. You still would have done it? Yes. Then the apology means very little. It means I understand why you are angry. It does not mean I will leave you unprotected while Vane is watching you. Grace stared at him. You really do believe control is the same thing as care? Luca's expression closed. Sometimes control is what keeps people alive. Maybe in your world. In every world. Mine simply admits it. Grace turned away before he could see that the answer had unsettled her. Downstairs, Evelyn sat at the bar drinking tea. When Grace approached, the old woman's eyes went to the chain at her throat. Grace had pulled it outside her blouse without noticing. A small silver St. Christopher medal rested against her skin. Evelyn's cup slipped from her hand and struck the saucer. Where did you get that? Grace touched the medal. It belonged to my father. What was his name? Luca had reached the bottom of the stairs. Grace looked from Evelyn to him. Thomas Holloway. The room became silent again, but this silence was different from the one that followed the coins. Evelyn covered her mouth. Luca stopped moving. Grace saw recognition in both their faces. Then she saw something worse in Luca's. Guilt. You knew him, she said. Luca did not insult her by pretending otherwise. Grace took one step toward him. You knew my father. Luca looked at the medal Thomas had worn the night he died. He saved my life. Grace's voice dropped, and what happened to his Luca held her gaze. He died saving mine. The words did not echo. They sank. Grace stood in the center of Aurelia with one hand still touching the silver medal at her throat. For a moment she looked as though the floor had shifted beneath her and she was deciding whether to fall or fight. Luca had seen men react to betrayal with rage. He had seen grief arrive as shouting broken glass and blood on walls. Grace did none of those things. She simply looked at him when, 13 years ago, we're a warehouse near the river, and you were there. Yes. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Grace turned toward her. You knew too. I knew part of it, Evelyn said. How much is part enough to know your father died protecting someone? Not enough to know that someone was standing in front of me. Grace looked back at Luca. You have had 14 months. I did not know who you were. You knew my name. Bennett. My mother's name. I searched for Grace Holloway. You own half the city. The accusation landed cleanly. Luca accepted it. I searched badly. Matteo, standing near the office stairs, shifted his weight. He had never heard Luca speak about failure in such plain words. Grace pulled the medal from beneath her blouse. The chain shook in her fingers. My mother said he died in a robbery. She was protecting you. From what Luca did not answer immediately. Grace stepped closer. From you, the restaurant seemed to contract around them. Luca could have softened the truth. He could have separated himself from the violence and blamed men who were long dead. He had spent years learning how to control information. A precise truth could be more useful than a lie. But Thomas Holloway's daughter was standing before him, and anything less than the whole truth would make his promise worthless again. From the life around me, Luca said. Your father worked near it. He was not part of my organization, but he knew people who were. He repaired trucks at a warehouse my family controlled. One night he overheard 2 men planning to kill me. Grace's fingers closed around the medal. What did he do? He warned me. And then he got me out. Luca looked toward the dark windows. Snow pressed against the glass in soft waves. There was a service corridor behind the loading floor. Thomas forced me through it before the shooting started. I told him to follow. He stayed behind to lock the steel door. Grace stared at him. Why to give me time? Her voice cracked for the first time. You left him there? I went back. The words came harder now. The door had jammed. By the time I forced it open, he had been shot twice. Grace looked down at the medal in her palm. Luca remembered Thomas on the concrete. He remembered the smell of oil gunpowder and wet iron. He remembered kneeling in blood while sirens approached from streets away. Your father gave me Evelyn's name, Luca said. He said she would know where your mother had taken you. I promised I would find you. But you did not. No. Did he die there? Luca held her gaze. Yes. Grace turned away. She reached the bar and placed both hands on the marble as if it were the only solid thing in the room. My mother spent the rest of her life afraid, she said. Every time a car stayed behind us for more than 2 blocks, she changed direction. Every time someone knocked after dark, she turned off the lights. Luca listened. She never kept a job for more than a year. We moved between apartments, motels, and houses belonging to people I never met twice. She told me it was because she could not settle down. Grace laughed once without humor. She was running. Yes. And you knew she might be. Yes. Did you ever consider that being found by you was exactly what she feared? Luca did not answer. The silence was answer enough. Grace turned toward Evelyn. How did you know my mother? Evelyn folded the blanket across her knees. Your father lived next door to me before you were born. Your mother worked evenings at a pharmacy. I watched you when their shifts overlapped. A faint smile touched her face. You hated peas. You hid them beneath the edge of your plate and believed no one could see. Grace did not smile back. Why did she contact you after he died? Because I was one of the few people Thomas trusted who had no connection to Luca's world. Evelyn looked toward him. That was how Thomas described it. Luca remained still. Evelyn continued. Marianne came to my house the morning after Thomas died. She had packed one suitcase for both of you. She would not tell me where she was going. She only asked for cash in the name of a woman I knew in Ohio. My mother took me to Ohio for 6 months. Then she moved again. You stayed in contact for a while. Letters came from different towns. No return addresses. Then the letters stopped. Grace's expression hardened. And you never tried to find us? I did. Evelyn's eyes filled. Your mother did not want to be found. Years later, I saw your photograph in a neighborhood paper. A customer had collapsed at Aurelia and you kept him alive until the ambulance arrived. Grace remembered the night. A retired school teacher had choked on a piece of steak. She had cleared his airway while the dining room watched. I recognized your eyes, Evelyn said. Then I saw the name Grace Bennett. Why did you not come here than I intended to? Evelyn looked at the medical bracelet. Blackridge came first. Grace turned toward the windows. The sky beyond them had begun to pale, but dawn brought no warmth. Luca gave her space. After a long silence, she faced him again. I need rules. Luca's eyebrows drew together. If I stay and help Evelyn, there will be rules. You do not need my permission to help her. No, but I need your agreement if I am going to remain anywhere near you. Matteo quietly moved farther into the hall. Grace lifted one finger. You do not lie to me. Luca nodded. You do not investigate me, follow me, move me, or pay anyone for me without asking. His expression changed slightly. Grace saw it. That one is difficult for you. Yes, it is still a rule. What if you are in immediate danger? Then you tell me what you know and let me make a choice. Luca considered the condition. I can agree to ask whenever time permits. That sounds like a loophole. It is an honest limit. Grace studied him, then continued. You do not use my father to make me feel obligated to you. I would not. You already see me as a promise you failed to keep. Luca did not deny it. Grace's voice softened, though the anger remained. I am not a debt. No. Then stop looking at me like one. Something shifted behind Luca's eyes. You are not a debt, Grace. What am I? He could have said. Thomas's daughter. He could have said someone under his protection. Both answers would have been true and both would have been wrong. A woman who has every reason not to trust me. Grace held his gaze. That is a beginning. Matteo's phone rang before Luca could respond. He stepped into the dining room. I have the first records on Blackridge. Luca motioned toward the private table. Grace did not leave. That was not forgiveness, but it was a decision. Matteo placed a tablet on the table. Blackridge is one of 5 facilities controlled by Vane Senior Living. Conrad Vane is not listed as the direct owner of all of them. He uses separate companies, charitable foundations, and property groups. He opened a series of documents. The same physician appears in dozens of competency evaluations. Dr. Sylvia Crane. The same guardianship attorney appears in most of the court petitions. Houses belonging to residents are sold to 3 companies. All 3 lead back to the same investment office. Conrad's Grace asked. Not directly. The office belongs to his brother-in-law. Evelyn leaned forward. What about the people who died? Matteo changed screens. Blackridge reported 27 resident deaths during the last 18 months. Grace frowned. That may not be unusual for a facility that size. No, Matteo said, but 11 of them died within 6 weeks of a property transfer or beneficiary change. Luca looked at him. Beneficiary of what life insurance? The room fell silent. Matteo enlarged one document. A charitable foundation connected to Vane Senior Living became the beneficiary on several policies. The residents signed amendments after being declared incompetent. Grace stared at the screen. That makes no sense. A person cannot be incapable of managing her affairs and competent enough to change an insurance beneficiary whenever it benefits the guardian. It makes sense if the doctor and guardian approve both documents, Matteo said. Evelyn closed her eyes. Margaret. Grace turned. Who is Margaret? Margaret Ellis. Room 214. Evelyn spoke carefully as though reciting something she had repeated in darkness. She owned a narrow brick house in Lawrenceville. Her husband built the kitchen cabinets. She talked about them every day. What happened to her? They told her the house needed to be sold to pay for care. She cried for a week. Then they increased her morphine. Grace's face tightened. Was she in pain? She had arthritis. When did she die? 2 days after men came to collect her keys. Matteo searched the records. Margaret Ellis. Property sold April 8th. Medication adjustment April 10th. Death recorded April 11th. Evelyn looked at Grace. She was awake at breakfast. By dinner, she could not lift her head. Luca asked, "How do you remember all of this?" Evelyn's expression changed. Fear returned, but beneath it was something harder. I did not trust memory alone. She looked toward Grace. My coat. Grace brought the faded green coat from the chair near the fire. Evelyn ran her fingers along the inside seam. There is a line of dark thread beneath the left pocket. Grace found it. Cut there. Luca handed her a small knife from the bar. Grace opened the seam carefully. Beneath the lining was a narrow package wrapped in 2 layers of plastic. She placed it on the table. Inside was a black notebook. Its cover had softened with age and handling. The pages were filled with tiny handwriting names, dates, medication, changes, room numbers, property addresses, and initials. Grace turned the pages slowly. How did you write this without anyone seeing? At night, in the bathroom when my roommate slept, sometimes beneath the blanket. Where did you get the information? Medication carts. Files left open at the nurse's station, conversations in the hall, mail taken from residents. Staff believed I could not understand them. Evelyn touched one page. I let them believe it. Luca studied her. You pretended to be confused. At first, I corrected people. That made them watch me. Then I started forgetting names on purpose. I asked the same questions twice. I stared through people when they spoke. Her mouth tightened. It is strange how invisible a woman becomes when others decide her mind is gone. Grace turned to a page marked with a red line. At the top was Evelyn's own name. Beneath it were the words, House transfer pending. Insurance review approved. Medical transfer scheduled. What does medical transfer mean? Grace asked. Evelyn did not answer immediately. Every resident marked for medical transfer died before leaving the building. Grace looked toward Luca. When was this written? 3 days ago. Why did you wait until last night to escape? The storm caused the power to fail. The laundry loading door opened when the emergency system reset. I hid inside a delivery truck. You walked from Blackridge to the restaurant part of the way. Through that snow, Evelyn gave a tired shrug. The alternative was staying. Grace reached across the table and covered the old woman's hand. Luca watched the gesture. Grace's anger had not made her cruel. Her fear had not made her retreat. She had every reason to walk away from his world. Yet she sat beside Evelyn as if leaving had never been an option. Matteo photographed every page. This notebook gives us names and a pattern, he said. It does not prove who ordered anything. It proves Evelyn knew what was happening, Grace replied. A defense attorney will say she copied rumors. Conrad already has a doctor claiming she suffers from paranoid delusions. Luca looked at the notebook. What would prove it? Original medication records. insurance amendments, internal messages, competency reports created before examinations. Grace glanced at Evelyn's entries. Blackridge keeps physical records in a basement archive. Everyone looked at her. She continued. I completed part of my nursing placement there 6 years ago. The administrative offices were renovated, but the old records room was below the west wing. Luca's answer came immediately. No. Grace looked at him. I have not proposed anything. You were about to. They use temporary nursing staff. The storm has closed several roads. They will be short-handed. No. You agreed not to make decisions for me. I agreed to ask when time permitted. This is me asking you not to enter a building controlled by a man who has already threatened you. That is not asking. It is the correct answer. Grace stood. You do not get to decide that. Luca rose with her. Evelyn looked between them. Grace placed one hand on the notebook. This is not enough to keep her safe. Conrad has a court order. By tomorrow evening he could take her back. My attorney is challenging it. And Conrad has a doctor, a judge, and a police captain. I will find another way. With intimidation. With whatever is necessary. Grace stepped closer. That is the problem. You believe whatever is necessary always means whatever you can control. Luca's voice lowered. And you believe courage means walking into danger because the alternative makes you feel helpless. The words struck. Grace's eyes flashed. You know nothing about what makes me feel helpless. I know men were waiting outside your home. I know Conrad bought information about your mother. I know you are exhausted, angry, and trying to prove you do not need anyone. I do not need you to describe me. I need you alive. The sentence escaped before Luca could contain it. The anger between them changed shape. Grace stared at him. Luca's expression remained controlled, but his eyes did not. She lowered her voice. Is that because of my father? No. The answer came too quickly to be calculated. Grace looked away first. Matteo broke the silence. No one is entering Black Ridge today. We do not have the access preparation or secure transfer for the evidence. Grace turned toward him. But it can be done? Possibly. Luca looked at Matteo. Matteo met his stare without apology. Possibly is not a plan. A heavy knock sounded against the front door. One of Luca's men entered carrying a thick envelope. This was left outside. Luca opened it. Inside were copies of Grace's mother's loan documents, hospital bills, and a notice assigning the debt to a new creditor. The creditor was Allegheny Recovery Holdings. Matteo checked the company on his phone. It was formed 6 months ago. Owner Luca asked. A trust managed by Conrad Vane's attorney. Grace read the total printed at the bottom of the notice. The number was more than she could earn in years. A note had been placed over the first page. Return Mrs. Parker, and the account will be closed. Grace tore the note in half. Then she tore it again. Luca watched the pieces fall onto the table. He expects you to negotiate, he said. He can expect whatever he wants. This debt may not be legally enforceable. It has been legally enforceable enough to take half my wages. I can have it examined. Grace looked at him. Ask. The word stopped him. Luca understood. May I have my attorney examine the loan? Grace's expression softened by the smallest degree. Yes. He handed the documents to Matteo. It was a minor exchange, almost nothing compared with the danger surrounding them. Yet both felt its importance. Luca had asked. Grace had accepted help. That evening, Evelyn fell asleep in a private room above Aurelia. Grace remained beside her until her breathing became steady. When she entered the kitchen, she found Luca standing over a pot on the stove. His jacket hung across a chair, and his white sleeves were folded to his forearms. What are you doing? Making soup. You own a kitchen staff. They went home. You sent them home. Yes. Grace looked into the pot. You put too much garlic in it. Luca tasted the broth. No. You did. My mother taught me this recipe. Your mother may have been wrong. Luca looked at her with genuine offense. Grace laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. For several seconds, the kitchen felt removed from court orders, dead residents, and promises made in blood. Luca lowered the spoon. Your father hated garlic. Grace's smile disappeared, but not from pain alone. You remember that he claimed he could taste one piece from across a room. He told me he was allergic. He lied. Why? To avoid my mother's cooking. Grace shook her head. That sounds more like him than the man in my mother's stories. She gave you his ending. Luca turned down the flame. You should have had his life too. Grace sat at the preparation table. Tell me something that has nothing to do with the night he died. Luca considered. He cheated at cards. Was he good terrible? He smiled whenever he had a useful hand. What else? He carried crackers for stray dogs. He sang when he repaired engines, but he never knew all the words. Grace listened in silence. The father she had carried for 13 years had been frozen in one photograph and one hospital story. Luca's memories gave him movement again. When Luca finished speaking, Grace looked toward the stove. You are burning the soup. He turned quickly. She smiled. It was the first time he saw how she might have looked before grief taught her caution. Later, Grace fell asleep at a table beside Evelyn's room. Her head rested on her folded arms, one hand still near the black notebook. Luca found her there after midnight. He removed his coat and placed it over her shoulders. She stirred but did not wake. He stood beside her longer than he should have. Thomas had asked him to keep Grace away from his life. Instead, his life had found her through hunger debt and a woman declared dead. A floorboard moved in the corridor. Luca looked up. Cole Brennan stood at the far end of the hall. Everything all right? Cole asked. Luca studied him. Yes. Cole glanced toward Grace and the closed door behind her. You are spending a great deal of time on this. A woman's life is in danger. Lives are always in danger. Luca's gaze became colder. Did you come here to tell me which ones matter? Cole lowered his eyes. No. Then go home. Cole turned and walked downstairs. Outside, he sat in his car without starting the engine. For several minutes, he watched the upper windows of Aurelia. Then he removed a second phone from beneath the seat. He typed a message. Moretti has the notebook. The reply arrived almost immediately. Can he prove it? Cole looked back at the restaurant. Not yet. Inside, Grace woke beneath Luca's coat. She recognized the dark wool and the faint scent of cedar and smoke. Across the room, Luca stood near the window with Thomas's blood-stained letter in his hand. Grace approached quietly. What does it say? Luca looked at her. For 13 years, the letter had belonged to his guilt. Now he held it out. Grace unfolded the paper. She read her father's final request beneath the warm light of the restaurant where she had worked without knowing the truth. When she finished, she pressed the letter against her chest. Luca did not touch her. I am sorry, he said. Grace closed her eyes. For which part? All of it. She looked at him again. I am still angry. You should be. I do not forgive you. I know. But Evelyn needs us. Luca nodded. Grace placed the letter beside the black notebook. My father trusted her. She trusted you enough to walk through a snowstorm. Her fingers rested on Evelyn's list of the dead. We cannot let Conrad turn them into confused old people no one believes. We will not. Grace looked toward the room where Evelyn slept. Then she faced Luca. I am going into Blackridge. His jaw tightened. Before he could refuse, she continued. You can help me do it safely, or I can find another way. Luca stared at her long enough for the fire to settle behind them. He saw Thomas in her defiance, but the courage belonged entirely to Grace. Finally, he looked at Matteo. "Find a staffing company Black Ridge uses." Matteo nodded. Grace exhaled. Luca stepped closer to her. "This does not mean I approve. I did not ask for approval." "No. You asked me to trust you." Grace held his gaze. "Can you?" Luca looked at the woman he had failed to find the notebook that could expose an empire and the letter of a dead man who had once believed he might become better than the world that made him. "Yes," he said. From the street below, Cole watched the light in Luca's office disappear. He started his car and made one final call. "They're going inside." Cole ended the call and watched Aurelia disappear in his rearview mirror. Inside the restaurant, Luca Moretti stood across from Grace Bennett with Thomas Holloway's letter between them. He had agreed to trust her. That did not mean he had accepted the fear. By sunrise, Matteo had found the staffing agency Blackridge used when winter storms left its nursing floors understaffed. The agency was legitimate. Its owner was not loyal to Luca, but he owed Matteo a favor old enough to be inconvenient. Grace's practical nursing license had expired, yet her training records remained valid. The staffing agency entered her as a temporary care assistant rather than a nurse. She would not be authorized to prescribe or change medication, but she would have access to the patient floors. It was not enough. It was the only opening they had. Matteo spread a floor plan across Luca's office desk. Blackridge has 3 active wings. The West Wing contains private rooms and administrative offices. The East Wing houses residents requiring memory care. The basement connects both through laundry maintenance and storage. Grace traced one line with her finger. "The old archive should be here," should be, Luca asked. "It was there 6 years ago. That is not reassuring." Grace looked at him. "You agreed. I agreed to make it possible. I did not agree to enjoy it." Matteo ignored them. "A former Blackridge nurse is meeting us this afternoon. Rachel Sloan. She resigned after filing 3 complaints that went nowhere." "Can we trust her?" Luca asked. "She contacted the state herself before we found her." "That was not my question." Matteo looked at Grace. "She has more reason to hate Conrad than to help him." Luca remained unconvinced. Grace folded the map. "Then let me decide after I speak to her." Luca's eyes moved to her face. He disliked the sentence. He said nothing. Rachel Sloan arrived at Aurelia through the kitchen entrance 2 hours later. She was 34 with tired eyes and a nervous habit of rubbing her thumb across a pale scar on her wrist. She carried an old Blackridge identification card inside her coat. "I worked nights," Rachel said. "That was when they moved people." Grace sat beside her at the preparation table. Moved them where they called it medical transfer. Sometimes an ambulance came. Sometimes it did not. "What happened to the residents?" Rachel looked toward Luca before answering. "They died." Luca remained near the door, silent. Rachel continued. "I started copying medication records after a man named Walter Keene stopped breathing. He had been talking to me an hour earlier. His chart showed a dose I never administered." "Did you report it?" Grace asked. "To Captain Pike. He said I had entered the dosage incorrectly. Had you know?" Rachel placed her old access card on the table. "I was suspended the next morning. 2 weeks later, my apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen. They left Walter's chart on my bed." Grace understood the message. Rachel pushed the card toward her. "This still opens the basement service door. At least it did 3 months ago." "Why are you helping now?" "Because Elena Parker escaped." Rachel's voice trembled. "I thought everyone inside had stopped fighting." Grace closed her fingers around the card. "Not everyone." They prepared in silence after Rachel left. Matteo gave Grace a small camera hidden inside a black button. Every image would transfer to an encrypted server outside Luca's network. "If they take the phone, the evidence remains," he said. Luca placed a tracking device on the table. Grace looked at it. "You are asking?" "Yes." The word cost him nothing, yet it sounded difficult. Grace picked up the device. "Where does it go?" Luca stepped closer. "Inside your collar." She turned her back. His fingers brushed the fabric beneath her hair. The contact was brief, but both of them became aware of the quiet room, the cold light at the window, and the fact that he was standing close enough to feel her breathing. Grace looked over her shoulder. "Are you afraid Luca fastened the device?" "I am rarely afraid." "That was not my question." He lowered his hands. "Yes." She turned to face him. "Do you trust me?" Luca looked at her for a long moment. "I trust you. I do not trust what waits inside that building." Grace wanted to say something lighter. The words did not come. Instead, she touched the silver medal at her throat. Luca noticed. "Your father wore that every day. You already told me. I did not tell you he touched it whenever he lied." Grace almost smiled. Then he must have touched it often, constantly. The smile came then, small and real. Luca reached into his coat and removed Thomas's letter. Grace looked at it. "I thought you kept that locked away." "I did." He held it toward her. "It belongs to you." Grace took the envelope. The brown stain at the corner had darkened with time, but she knew what it was. Did he write it before the warehouse a week before? So he knew something might happen. He suspected. Grace opened the letter again. Her father's handwriting crossed the page like a voice returning from a closed room. "Keep my little girl away from our life." Grace folded it carefully. "Is that what you are trying to do?" "Yes. You are not very good at it." "No." She placed the envelope inside her coat. Luca studied her face. "Grace, I know." "No, you do not." His voice lowered. "If something changes inside, leave. Do not wait for proof. Do not wait for permission. Leave." She held his gaze. "I will come back." It was not a promise she could guarantee. It was the only one she could give. Blackridge stood on a hill above the river, a wide stone building surrounded by bare trees and untouched snow. From the road it looked peaceful. Soft yellow lights glowed behind tall windows. A brass sign near the entrance promised dignity, comfort, and compassionate care. Grace parked in the employee lot. A temporary badge hung from her coat. She entered through the service door with 2 agency workers who complained about the weather and the early hour. No one inspected her bag. No one asked why her name had appeared on the staffing list that morning. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant, boiled vegetables, and something stale beneath both. A television played too loudly in the common room. An elderly man sat in a wheelchair facing the wall. 3 call lights blinked above closed doors. No one moved to answer them. Grace signed a clipboard at the nursing station. The supervisor barely looked up. "West Hall. Help with breakfast bedding and medication support. Do not let anyone leave the unit. Do residents try to leave often?" The supervisor looked at her then. "They all think they are going somewhere?" Grace carried a tray down the hall. Room after room held evidence of lives reduced to labels. A retired teacher asked whether the school bus had arrived. A woman with swollen hands begged Grace to call her son. An aide passed without stopping. "He never visits," she said. The woman heard her, her face turned toward the window. Grace knelt beside the chair. "What is your son's name, Michael?" Grace wrote it on the back of a supply receipt. "I will remember." The woman looked at her as though being remembered was an act of rescue. At the end of the corridor, an aide prepared medication cups. Grace saw 2 tablets roll beneath the wrong name card. "That belongs to Mrs. Donnelly," Grace said. The aide shrugged. "They take the same thing." Grace checked the labels. One is a blood thinner. One is a sedative. The aide snatched the cups away. "You are temporary. Do the beds." Grace said nothing. She understood then how murder could hide inside routine. Not every death required a conspiracy. Some only required exhaustion, indifference, and a system that treated old bodies as interchangeable. Evelyn's former room was on the second floor. The name beside the door had already been replaced. Grace entered with fresh sheets. A new resident slept beneath the window. The closet stood empty except for a plastic hanger and a pair of slippers too small for Evelyn. Grace knelt near the baseboard. 3 narrow scratches marked the wood. She loosened the strip with the edge of her badge. A folded paper waited behind it. Room numbers covered the page. 214, 215, 216. Each number matched an entry in Evelyn's notebook. At the bottom, one sentence had been written in shaky letters. "They moved the records after midnight." Grace placed the paper inside her sleeve. Her earpiece clicked once. Mateo's voice was barely audible. Rachel triggered the maintenance call. "Basement camera is dark for 6 minutes." Grace pushed the linen cart toward the service elevator. The access card opened the basement door on the second attempt. Cold air met her inside. The hallway below Blackridge had none of the polished calm of the upper floors. Pipes crossed the ceiling. Paint peeled from concrete walls. Laundry machines thundered behind a steel door. Grace followed the old floor plan to the archive. Rachel's card opened that door too. Metal shelves filled the room from wall to wall. Boxes bore resident names, dates, and facility codes. Grace searched for Margaret Ellis first. She found the file beneath a stack marked deceased. The official medication record showed a sudden increase in morphine the day before Margaret died. A handwritten nursing note stated that the patient had reported no severe pain. Grace photographed both pages. She found the property transfer next. Margaret's house had been sold to Riverstone Holdings for less than half its assessed value. The company address matched one Mateo had connected to Conrad's brother-in-law. Grace moved faster. Walter Keene. Morphine increased. Life insurance beneficiary changed. Dead 48 hours later. Ruth Donnelly. Declared incompetent before Dr. Crane's recorded examination date. House sold the same week. Medical transfer. Dead. George Taylor. No close family. Pension redirected. Medication error. Dead. The camera inside Grace's button continued sending every page. Mateo's voice returned. 2 minutes. Grace opened a cabinet at the end of the room. Locked. She used a key Rachel had given her. Inside were insurance policies arranged by resident. Near the front was one bearing Evelyn Parker's name. Grace pulled it free. A charitable foundation controlled by Conrad Vane had been named beneficiary. The policy had been approved 11 days earlier. A medical transfer order had been attached. Tonight's date appeared at the bottom. Grace photographed everything. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. She closed the cabinet. The archive door opened. A maintenance worker stared at her. "What are you doing?" Grace lifted a box. West Hall asked for old care records. No one comes down here without administration. His hand moved toward the radio at his belt. Grace dropped the box against his foot. He shouted. She ran. The lockdown alarm began before she reached the elevator. Magnetic doors sealed throughout the building. Her earpiece crackled. "Grace, leave now." Luca's voice. She pushed through the laundry room. Workers turned toward her. A security guard entered from the opposite side. Grace grabbed a cart of folded sheets and shoved it into his path. The cart overturned, filling the corridor with white fabric. She ran through the steam toward the service exit. The door did not open. Rachel's card failed once. Twice. A guard appeared behind her. On the third attempt, the lock released. Grace stepped into the snow. North Lot Mateo said, "Keep moving." She reached her car and started the engine. A black sedan left the front drive behind her. Grace turned onto the river road. The sedan followed. At first it kept 2 car lengths between them. Then it struck her rear bumper. Grace gripped the wheel. Her car slid toward the shoulder before the tires found the road again. The sedan struck a second time. Snow covered the guardrail ahead. Beyond it, the hillside dropped toward the river. Grace heard Luca through the earpiece. "Slow down near the next intersection. They are trying to push me off the road." "I know." A dark sport utility vehicle appeared from a side street. It drove directly between Grace and the sedan. The pursuing car swerved and struck a snowbank. Grace stopped 50 yards ahead. Luca's vehicle halted behind her. He stepped out before the driver had fully braked. One of Conrad's men emerged from the crashed sedan with a gun. Luca reached him before he could raise it. The first blow broke the man's grip. The second drove him against the hood. The gun fell into the snow. The man collapsed, but Luca did not stop. Grace opened her door. "Luca." He struck the man again. "Luca." Her voice reached him. He stood over the bleeding figure, breathing hard, his knuckles dark with blood. Grace had seen the control that made powerful men lower their eyes. This was what lived beneath it. Luca turned toward her. "Are you hurt?" She looked at the man on the ground. "Did you have to do that?" "He aimed a gun at you." "That was not my question." Luca's expression closed. "He will live. You did not know that while you were hitting him." Snow gathered in his hair and on the shoulders of his coat. Grace stepped closer. "You stopped him. Then you kept going. He tried to kill you. And that gives you permission to become whatever you want." Luca's jaw tightened. "You are alive. That does not make everything you did right." Matteo arrived with 2 vehicles and federal copies of the evidence already secured. Grace gave him the insurance file. Luca tried to touch the cut near her forehead. She moved away. The distance was only 1 step. It felt larger. Back at Aurelia, Grace uploaded the final images while Matteo contacted Helen Mercer. The records were enough to challenge Evelyn's guardianship and establish probable cause for a larger investigation. They had proof. For several minutes, no one noticed that the safe house had stopped responding. Then Luca's phone rang. He listened without speaking. His face changed. "Where is Evelyn?" The man on the line answered. Luca lowered the phone. "Stay here," he told Grace. She followed him anyway. The safe house door stood open. 1 guard lay dead near the entrance. A chair had been overturned in the kitchen. Broken glass covered the floor. Evelyn was gone. On the table, someone had arranged $3.14 in a perfect line. Luca stared at the coins. His silence frightened Grace more than shouting would have. Matteo checked the security system. The location was compromised from inside. Luca's phone rang again. Conrad's voice filled the room. "Bring the notebook and every copy of the records before sunrise. Let me hear her." There was movement on the line. Then Evelyn spoke. "Do not trade the names for me." Her breathing sounded strained. Conrad took the phone back. "She still believes courage will save her." Luca looked at the blood near the doorway. "If you hurt her, there will be nowhere on this earth you can hide." Conrad laughed softly. "You are still trying to frighten a man who has courts, doctors, and police in his pocket." The call ended. Matteo placed 3 phones on the kitchen counter. Only 3 senior men had known the safe house address. Each had been given a slightly different relocation time. The information Conrad used belonged to Cole Brennan. They found Cole at a private garage near the river loading cash into the trunk of a car. He reached beneath his coat. Luca struck him before the weapon cleared the fabric. Cole fell against the car. Luca pressed a gun beneath his chin. "Where is she?" Cole smiled through blood. "You care more about an old woman and a waitress than the men who built your empire. Where Blackridge?" Grace entered behind Matteo. Cole looked at her. "There is the reason." Luca pushed the gun harder against his skin. Cole laughed. You think she will love you after she sees what you are? Grace looked at Luca's hand. His finger rested against the trigger. She did not ask him to forgive Cole. She did not tell him Cole deserved mercy. If you kill him, she said, Conrad loses a witness. Luca's eyes remained on Cole. Every instinct in him demanded blood. The dead guard at the safe house, Evelyn's bruised hands, Thomas on the warehouse floor, Grace's car sliding toward the river. He lowered the gun. Cole's smile disappeared. Where inside Blackridge, Luca asked, the abandoned medical wing beneath the East building. Conrad uses it when he needs a death to look clinical. What is he planning an overdose? Then he calls the police and says you kidnapped her. By morning, Evelyn is dead and you are the only criminal anyone sees. Luca handed the weapon to Matteo. Cole stared at him. You have become weak. Luca looked down at him. No, I have become patient. He stepped outside. Snow moved across the dark river. Grace followed. You cannot go in alone, she said. I will not. You are calling your men. No. Luca removed his phone. For years he had solved danger with fear money and violence. Those methods could rescue Evelyn's body. They could not protect her testimony or the names inside the notebook. Grace stood beside him. Save her, she said. Do it in a way that keeps her story alive. Luca called Special Agent Dana Cross. She answered on the fourth ring. This is Moretti. A pause followed. I know who this is. I have evidence against Conrad Vane. What do you want? Luca looked through the snow toward Blackridge's distant lights. Nothing. Cross did not respond. Luca continued. I am giving you the records, the witness, and the money trail. You bring a team to Blackridge now. And what are you offering in return for federal protection? Luca's gaze settled on Grace. My cooperation. With Vane. With everything. The words remained between Luca and Special Agent Dana Cross. Snow moved through the darkness beyond the river soft enough to look harmless from a distance. Blackridge stood on the hill with its windows glowing beneath the storm, each light hiding a room where someone had learned not to call for help. Dana Cross spoke again. Do you understand what you are offering? Yes. I am not asking whether you understand the sentence. Luca watched Grace standing several feet away. There was dried blood near her hairline. His coat was wrapped around her shoulders, though neither of them remembered when he had placed it there. Dana continued. If the records lead through your businesses, my office will follow them. If your companies moved money for Vane knowingly or otherwise, we will seize accounts. We will subpoena employees. We will examine every contract connected to the river. Matteo stood near the garage entrance. His face remained calm, but Luca knew what he was calculating. Warehouses, construction deals, shipping routes, men who depended on Luca for income, men who depended on him for silence. How quickly can you reach Blackridge? Luca asked. Dana did not answer immediately. You are not negotiating. No, that is new. People change when there is no time left to lie. A pause. Send me everything Dana said. Records, photographs, financial links, and the location of the witness. She is being held in the abandoned medical wing beneath the East building. How do you know? The man who sold the location told me. Is he alive? Luca looked toward the garage. Cole Brennan sat against the rear tire of a car, one hand pressed to his bleeding mouth. Two of Matteo's men stood over him. Yes, keep him that way. Luca ended the call. Grace watched him. You meant it. What everything? Luca placed the phone in his pocket. It is the only offer she would believe. You could lose your businesses. Yes. Your money. Yes. Your freedom. He looked at her. Yes. Grace searched his face for hesitation. There was none. Matteo approached. Dana Cross has been investigating Vane for 14 months. Her office already has insurance claims from 3 facilities. Grace's photographs give her what she was missing. A living witness, Grace said, and proof that the medication changes were deliberate. Luca looked toward Blackridge. How long? She is moving a federal response team from downtown. 20 minutes if the roads remain open. Evelyn may not have 20. Matteo nodded. We can reach the maintenance tunnel in 12. Grace stepped forward. I am coming. No, Luca said. Her eyes hardened. He caught himself. The old instinct had spoken before thought. Luca took a breath. Why Grace understood what the question cost him. Because Conrad intends to kill her with medication. I know the drugs in those records. If he has already injected her, every minute matters. Federal medics will be there. They will not know Evelyn's condition before they reach her. I do. Luca looked at the cut on her forehead. You were almost killed less than an hour ago, and she was taken because she trusted us. That is not your fault. It does not have to be my fault to become my responsibility. Luca looked away. The words sounded like something Thomas might have said. Dana called again 12 minutes later. Her team had obtained an emergency federal warrant based on the uploaded record's insurance documents, unlawful confinement evidence, and immediate threat to Evelyn's life. She would meet them near the service road below Blackridge. No private army, Dana warned. 4 men. 2. 3. 2 including you. Luca almost argued. Grace watched him. Agreed, he said. Dana fell silent for half a second. You really are frightened. Luca ended the call. They drove through the storm in 2 vehicles. Matteo remained behind to secure the evidence and prepare Cole for federal custody. Grace sat beside Luca in the rear of the first vehicle. Neither spoke until Blackridge appeared through the trees. The facility looked almost beautiful beneath the snow. Grace stared at the upper windows. How many people are still inside? More than 100, Luca said. Some of them may not know they are prisoners. Most prisons work better when the doors look ordinary. She turned toward him. How many prisons have you built? The question held no accusation. That made it harder. Luca looked at his hands. Enough. Grace waited. He continued. I told myself the people around me understood the rules. I told myself fear was only another kind of agreement. And now I know agreement without choice is only obedience. Grace studied him. Knowing is not the same as changing. No. The vehicle stopped beneath the trees. Dana Cross waited beside a dark federal transport with 6 agents in body armor. She was tall, composed, and dressed for the cold beneath a protective vest. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Her eyes moved from Luca to Grace, then to the hill above them. You were told 2 people, Dana said. There are 2. Dana looked at Grace. She is not one of your soldiers. No, Luca said. She is the reason you have evidence. Grace stepped forward. I trained as a practical nurse. I have seen the medication files. Conrad is likely using opioids and sedatives to create respiratory failure. Dana examined her face. You are injured. I am functional. That is not a medical term. It is tonight. Dana looked toward Luca. This operation belongs to the federal government. You follow my orders. You carry no weapon unless one of my agents gives you one. You do not leave the assigned route. Luca nodded. Dana seemed almost disappointed by the lack of resistance. She opened a map across the hood of her vehicle. Federal agents enter through the administrative wing. A second team secures the resident floors and medication rooms. The service tunnel reaches the abandoned east wing here. Her finger touched a narrow passage beneath the building. Cole Brennan says Vane uses this corridor. Cole says many things, Luca replied. Tonight he says them while wearing a federal recorder. A vehicle arrived behind them. 2 agents removed Cole from the rear seat. His hands were restrained in front of him. Blood had dried beneath his nose. He looked at Luca. "I did not think you would call them." "That was your mistake." Cole gave a bitter smile. "My mistake was believing you cared more about the organization than about a waitress." Grace stepped closer. "Her name is Evelyn." Cole looked at her. "I was not talking about the old woman." Luca moved before he could stop himself. Dana stepped between them. "One more threat, one more attempt to settle something privately, and I remove you from the operation." Luca forced himself to stand still. Cole looked pleased. Then Dana turned to him. "You are entering the tunnel first." His smile disappeared. The service entrance was hidden behind a maintenance shed near the lower edge of the property. Cole led them through a rusted door and down a narrow concrete stairwell. Water dripped from exposed pipes. The air smelled of damp stone and old chemicals. Dana's first team moved ahead. Grace remained between 2 agents. Luca walked behind her. The tunnel narrowed until they moved in a single line. Cole stopped at a metal junction box. "There is a pressure alarm beyond this point." Dana raised a hand. "How do you disable it? You need the service key. Where is it?" Cole looked at Luca. "Conrad's security chief keeps one." Dana's jaw tightened. "You brought us here knowing the passage was alarmed. I brought you here because the main building has 6 locked doors between Evelyn and daylight." An agent inspected the box. "Mechanical circuit. I can bypass it." He opened the panel. A sound moved through the darkness behind them. Not footsteps. A scrape. Luca turned first. A man emerged from a side passage with a pistol raised. Cole saw him before the agents did. Down. The shot struck Cole high in the shoulder. Dana's team returned fire. The attacker fell behind a pipe. Cole collapsed against the wall. Luca caught him before his head struck the concrete. Blood spread through his coat. Grace moved immediately. "Release his hands." Dana unlocked the restraints. Grace pressed both hands over the wound. The bullet passed through. "Keep pressure here." Luca placed his palm where she directed. Cole looked up at him. "I thought mercy made you weak." Luca pressed harder as blood moved between his fingers. It nearly did. "Then why are you helping me? Because you are going to testify." Cole laughed once, then winced. "That sounds more like you." A federal medic took over. Dana ordered 2 agents to remain behind with Cole. The others continued. The bypassed alarm released with a faint click. They entered the abandoned wing. The corridor beyond looked forgotten. Paint peeled from the walls. Old hospital beds stood beneath sheets gray with dust. Then Grace heard breathing. She opened the first door. 3 elderly residents lay inside, restrained to narrow beds. Their eyes were closed. Plastic identification bands circled their wrists. Grace moved to the nearest woman. Her breathing was shallow. Her pupils barely reacted. "She has been heavily sedated." Dana signaled for the medical team. A man in the second bed did not respond to his name. Grace checked his pulse. "His heart rate is slow. We need oxygen and naloxone." An agent opened a medical kit. Grace took the medication. For 1 second, her hand trembled. The room changed around her. She heard a hospital monitor from years earlier. She saw her mother beneath white sheets, mouth open around a breathing tube. She remembered standing uselessly near the wall while nurses moved with calm purpose. Her fingers tightened around the syringe. Luca stood in the doorway. He did not tell her to hurry. He did not touch her. "Grace." She looked at him. "You know what to do." The words were simple. They returned her to the room. Grace administered the medication and placed an oxygen mask over the man's face. "Come on," she whispered. His chest rose. Then again. The woman beside him began coughing as a medic treated her. Grace moved to the 3rd resident. Her hands no longer shook. Dana received a message through her radio. "Administrative wing secured. Captain Pike is on site and attempting to interfere. Detain him. A second voice answered. Pike says he is responding to a kidnapping report. Dana looked at Luca. He arrived quickly. Conrad planned the timing. Then Pike can explain it in custody. A crash sounded from farther inside the east wing. Luca moved toward it. Dana caught his arm. You stay with the team. That came from Evelyn's location. You do not know that. Grace looked down the corridor. I do. A metal tray struck the floor somewhere beyond the next door. Then Evelyn screamed. Luca pulled free. Dana cursed and followed. They reached a treatment room at the end of the corridor. Conrad stood beside a hospital bed. Evelyn's wrists were secured with cloth restraints. One had been cut halfway through. A broken clip from her medical bracelet lay near her fingers. An open medication case rested on a steel table. Conrad held Grace's photograph in one hand. A syringe lay on the floor beneath the bed. Evelyn's head hung to one side. Her breathing came too slowly. Conrad looked toward the doorway. You arrived sooner than expected. Grace stepped into the room. What did you give her? Conrad smiled. Concern from a former waitress. How touching. What did you give her? A mild sedative. Mrs. Parker became agitated. Grace moved closer. Dana raised her weapon. Conrad Vane, step away from the bed. Conrad seized Evelyn by the shoulder and pulled her upright. A second syringe appeared in his hand. He pressed the needle against Evelyn's neck. Luca stopped moving. Conrad looked at him. There he is. Luca's face became still. The animal everyone warned me about. Dana kept her weapon aimed. Put the syringe down. Conrad ignored her. You could have remained in your restaurants, Luca. You could have counted money and frightened men who understood fear. Instead, you allowed an old woman to make you sentimental. Evelyn opened her eyes. Her voice came as a breath. He talks too much. Grace almost laughed, but fear caught the sound. Conrad tightened his hold. You built your empire with the same tools I used. Pressure, silence, people who could not afford to resist. Luca looked at Evelyn. A bruise darkened one side of her face. Her cut restraint hung from her wrist. What is in the syringe? Grace asked. Conrad glanced at her. Enough. Grace saw the vial on the tray. Fentanyl. A dose large enough to stop Evelyn's breathing within minutes. Luca, Grace said quietly. He understood. Conrad smiled. She knows what happens if my hand moves. Luca stepped into the room. Dana warned him to stop. He continued until he stood several feet from Conrad. You want the notebook? Luca said. I want every copy. You cannot erase what federal agents have. No, but I can erase the witness who gives those pages meaning. Evelyn looked at Conrad. You chose people no one would believe. He leaned closer to her. And I chose correctly. No, she whispered. You chose people no one had listened to yet. Her free hand moved. She drove the broken bracelet clip into Conrad's wrist. He shouted. The syringe fell. Grace lunged toward Evelyn. Conrad grabbed her hair and pulled her backward. His arm closed around her throat. Luca reached inside the room. Dana raised her weapon again, but Grace stood between them. Conrad picked up a broken piece of glass from the tray and pressed it beneath Grace's jaw. Luca stopped. The world narrowed to the line of blood appearing against Grace's skin. Conrad saw the change in his face. Yes, he said. That is the man I wanted. Luca's hand moved toward the weapon Dana had given him in the tunnel. Conrad smiled wider. Kill me. Grace's eyes found Luca's. Do not. Conrad pressed the glass harder. Prove every word I said. Prove that men like us never change. We only find better reasons. Luca drew the gun. Dana shouted his name. Conrad laughed. Luca saw Thomas on the warehouse floor. He saw the guard dead at the safe house. He saw Grace's car sliding toward the river. He saw Evelyn counting coins because hunger had become the last thing she still controlled. His finger tightened against the trigger. Grace did not look away. Luca lowered the gun. "You do not get to become my excuse." The smile left Conrad's face. Dana's agents entered through the second door. One struck Conrad's wrist. The glass fell. Grace pulled free. Agents forced Conrad to the floor and restrained him. He stared up at Luca. "You think this makes you different?" Luca looked down at him. "No." His voice was quiet. "It makes this choice different." Grace reached Evelyn. Her breathing had become dangerously slow. What did he inject? Evelyn's eyes fluttered. The first one. Grace found the empty vial near the bed. A sedative and an opioid. She opened the medical kit. "Evelyn, listen to me." No response. Grace administered naloxone and placed oxygen over the old woman's face. Nothing happened. Luca stood near the wall. For the first time in years, he possessed no useful power. He could not threaten the drug in Evelyn's blood. He could not buy another breath. He could not command death to leave the room. Grace checked Evelyn's pulse. "Come on." She adjusted the mask. "You did not walk through a blizzard to stop here." Evelyn remained still. Grace administered a second dose. Seconds stretched until the room seemed to lose sound. Then Evelyn coughed. Her body pulled in a sharp breath. Grace closed her eyes. Evelyn looked at her through the oxygen mask. "Did you save the records?" Grace laughed through tears. "Yes." "Then stop making that face." Federal agents moved through the facility. Servers were seized from Conrad's office. Medication carts were locked as evidence. Residents from the abandoned wing were transferred to waiting ambulances. Captain Pike was arrested near the main entrance after attempting to order local officers to remove the federal team. Dr. Sylvia Crane was detained at the airport before boarding a flight to Florida. Cole Brennan survived surgery and agreed to provide records of Conrad's payments, names of intermediaries, and details of the safe house abduction. Near dawn, Evelyn was placed inside an ambulance. Grace stood beside the open doors. Luca approached but did not come too close. Blood covered the front of his shirt. Most of it belonged to Cole. Grace touched the thin cut beneath her jaw. "I frightened you," Luca said. "Yes. I may frighten you again." "Yes." He looked toward Conrad, who was being placed inside a federal vehicle. "I wanted to kill him." "I know. I still do. I know that too." Luca looked at her. Grace's voice softened. "But you did not. That does not erase what you saw on the road." "No." Snow settled in her hair. "It tells me what you might become." Luca lowered his eyes. "And if I cannot become it," Grace stood on the ambulance step, "then whatever exists between us ends before it begins." She entered and sat beside Evelyn. The doors closed. Luca watched the ambulance move down the hill until its red lights disappeared behind the trees. Dana Cross approached carrying a folder. "You understand that cooperation does not erase your own crimes." "I understand. You may lose most of what you built." Luca looked toward Blackridge. Federal agents were leading Conrad through the snow. Residents watched from upper windows as locked doors opened below them. Luca placed his blood-stained hands inside his coat pockets. "Then I will find out what remains when the fear is gone." Dana Cross studied Luca for a moment, as though deciding whether the words were another performance. Then she handed him the folder. "You should read this before your attorney does." Luca opened it beneath the pale morning light. The first page listed the federal statutes under review: financial conspiracy, obstruction, unlawful business practices, money laundering through companies connected to the river. Some accusations belonged to Conrad Vane. Some did not. Luca read every line without changing expression. Behind him, Blackridge had begun to wake. Residents stood at windows while federal agents moved through the halls. Medical workers carried boxes of records into evidence vehicles. A woman in a blue robe watched Conrad being led across the snow in handcuffs. Conrad did not look defeated. He looked offended. He had spent years building a world in which everyone had a price, every signature could be bought, and every frightened person could be reduced to a file. Now, people he had trained to remain silent were watching him leave. Captain Aaron Pike was placed in a second vehicle. He shouted at local officers, ordering them to remove his restraints. No one moved. Luca closed the folder. "When do you need me?" Donna looked toward the line of ambulances. "Soon. You have my number. I have more than your number now." That was the agreement. Dana returned her attention to him. "Most men in your position start negotiating the moment the danger passes. The danger has not passed. For Evelyn. For everyone whose name was in that notebook." Dana's expression softened only slightly. "Go home, Mr. Moretti. Change your shirt. Then call your attorney." Luca looked down at the blood covering the front of his clothes. He had worn blood before. This was the first time it felt less like armor than evidence. At the hospital, Grace sat beside Evelyn while morning gathered behind the blinds. Evelyn slept beneath warm blankets, one hand resting outside them. The hospital had removed the Blackridge bracelet and replaced it with a plain white band bearing her name. Grace kept looking at the wrist. No institution name. No warning. No ownership. Only Evelyn Parker. A physician entered and reviewed the monitor. She was fortunate. Grace looked at him. She was poisoned. The doctor paused. "You are right." Grace had expected a softer word. Sedated. Overmedicated. Adverse reaction. The physician did not hide behind any of them. She was given enough medication to suppress her breathing. "The second dose you administered likely saved her life." Grace looked down. "I only did what I was trained to do." "That is what saving a life usually looks like." He left the room. Grace remained still. For years, she had believed the hospital had taken something from her. Her mother's final night had turned every monitor into an accusation and every white corridor into a place where love arrived too late. At Blackridge, her hands had remembered before her fear could stop them. She had moved. She had chosen. She had helped someone breathe. Evelyn opened her eyes. "You are thinking too loudly." Grace leaned closer. "How do you feel, old?" "That is not new." Evelyn smiled weakly. "Bossy." "That is also not new." Grace adjusted the blanket. "You need rest." "I rested at Blackridge. They called it treatment." Grace stopped moving. Evelyn reached for her hand. "I know where I am." "Good. I know what happened." Grace nodded. "And I know Luca did not kill Conrad." Grace looked toward the window. "No. Did you want him to?" The question unsettled her. For a moment, so did I. Grace looked back. Evelyn's face remained calm. "Wanting something terrible after someone hurts you does not make you terrible," she said. "Choosing it might." Grace thought of Luca lowering the gun. She thought of him on the road striking the man who had tried to force her car over the guardrail. She thought of his hand fastening the tracker inside her collar. The same hands. The same man. Different choices. "He is not safe," Grace said. Evelyn closed her eyes again. "Neither is fire. People still gather around it when they are cold. That is not a reason to walk into it." "No." Evelyn's voice softened. "It is a reason to watch what it does with the warmth." 3 days later, Evelyn gave her first formal statement from the hospital. Dana Cross sat beside a federal prosecutor while a camera recorded every word. Grace remained near the window. Luca waited in the corridor because his attorney had warned that his presence could allow Conrad's defense to question whether Evelyn had been pressured. Evelyn began with Margaret Ellis. She described the brick house in Lawrenceville, the cabinets built by Margaret's husband, and the way Margaret touched an invisible wedding ring after Blackridge took her jewelry. She described Walter Keene, who had spent 40 years driving city buses and could still recite every route in Pittsburgh. She described Ruth Donnelly, who wrote letters to a son no one believed existed. Each person had a name, a room, a habit, a story. The prosecutor asked Evelyn how she had collected the information. "At first I listened because there was nothing else to do," she said. "Then I realized listening might be the only thing I could still give them." "Did you understand the medications you recorded?" "No." "Did you understand the legal documents?" "Not all of them." Conrad's attorney would use those answers against her. Dana knew it. The prosecutor asked, "Then why did you write them down?" Evelyn looked into the camera. "Because people kept dying after papers were signed. I did not need to understand every word to understand that." She spoke for 2 hours. When the interview ended, Luca stood as the door opened. Evelyn came out in a wheelchair. She looked at him. "You waited. I said I would. You also said the soup was free." "It was." "I still owe you." "No." She looked down the corridor toward Grace. "We will discuss that later." Luca watched Grace approach. They had not been alone since Blackridge. Every time their eyes met, the unfinished conversation returned. He had frightened her. He had also trusted her when trust felt like surrender. Grace touched Evelyn's shoulder. "The doctor says you can leave tomorrow." "Where am I going?" Luca answered before he could stop himself. "I have arranged an apartment." Grace looked at him. He heard the mistake as soon as the words left his mouth. He corrected himself. "I found 3 possible apartments. You can decide whether you want to see them." Evelyn's eyebrows lifted. Grace said nothing. Luca added, "Or none of them." Evelyn looked from him to Grace. Progress. Luca accepted the judgment. Blackridge did not close in a single day. That surprised the public. People expected evil to collapse the moment it was exposed. They expected locked doors to open, records to speak clearly, and every guilty person to confess when shown the truth. Instead, attorneys arrived. Insurance representatives denied knowledge. Guardians claimed they had acted according to medical advice. Medical staff blamed supervisors. Supervisors blamed policy. Policy existed without a name. Federal agents spent weeks matching Evelyn's notebook to medication logs, insurance changes, court orders, property transfers, bank accounts, and death certificates. Some records had vanished. Some had been altered. Others were so ordinary that their violence appeared only when placed beside one another. A competency evaluation dated Monday. A house sale dated Wednesday. An insurance amendment dated Friday. A funeral the following week. Dana Cross built the case 1 page at a time. Grace helped when she could. She identified medical abbreviations in Evelyn's notebook and explained how medication changes would have affected frail residents. She sat with families who arrived carrying old photographs and years of guilt. Some had stopped visiting because Blackridge told them their relatives became agitated afterward. Some had believed doctors who said memory loss caused false accusations. Some had tried to complain until calls stopped being returned. A man named Michael Donnelly came from Arizona after seeing his mother's name in the news. Grace met him at the hospital. He was in his 50s with gray hair and a small suitcase. "My mother said they would not give her my letters," he said. Grace remembered the woman in the common room. "She asked for you." Michael looked toward the floor. "I thought she was confused. They told me she called staff by my name. She knew your name." His face broke. Grace did not tell him he should have come sooner. Blackridge had already used shame as a weapon. She led him to his mother. Michael entered the room and stopped. Ruth Donnelly looked up from her chair. For several seconds neither moved. Then Ruth lifted one swollen hand. You finally found the bus. Michael knelt beside her. Grace closed the door behind them. The news spread quickly through Pittsburgh. Aurelia became surrounded by cameras. Reporters waited near the front entrance and called Luca's name whenever a dark car approached. Some described him as a criminal who had exposed a greater criminal. Others called the rescue a calculated attempt to improve his image. Luca answered none of them. He met with federal investigators in a windowless office downtown. Dana placed photographs of shipping ledgers across the table. Vane used your warehouse network. My companies moved sealed medical supplies and equipment. Some shipments contained financial records and controlled medication. I did not authorize that. Did anyone in your organization accept payment not to inspect them? Luca looked at the name on one invoice. Cole Brennan. Yes. Did you benefit indirectly? Then the distinction may matter morally. It may not matter financially. Luca's attorney shifted beside him. We should pause. Luca kept looking at Dana. What do you need access to the port accounts? His attorney spoke again. Luca. Luca opened the folder he had brought. Inside were account numbers, ownership structures, contract names, and the people responsible for each route. He placed it on the table. His attorney closed his eyes. Dana did not touch the folder immediately. You understand this may expose conduct unrelated to Vane? Yes. Extortion? Yes. Illegal gambling? Yes. Payments to public officials? Yes. Dana leaned back. Why are you doing this? Luca thought of Thomas bleeding on a warehouse floor. For years he had treated that death as a private wound. He had believed guilt was proof of love, as if suffering quietly could honor the dead. It had not protected Grace. It had not found Evelyn. It had not changed him. Because Thomas Holloway paid for my life with his, Luca said. I spent 13 years pretending I could repay him without giving up anything I wanted. Dana looked at him for a long time. Then she took the folder. Luca lost the first warehouse 3 weeks later. Federal agents sealed the doors at dawn. The second was placed under court supervision. 2 construction contracts were suspended. Bank accounts connected to illegal revenue were frozen. Men who had called Luca family began calling attorneys. Some blamed Cole, some blamed Conrad, a few blamed Grace. Those men disappeared from Aurelia's employment before Luca heard the second complaint. Matteo found him one night in the empty dining room reading a list of seized properties. We can challenge several of these, Matteo said. We will challenge what is legal. And the rest, Luca set down the page. The rest was never truly ours. Matteo poured 2 glasses of water. You used to say possession was the only proof that mattered. I used to say many things. Some men think you have lost your judgment. Do you, Matteo, sat across from him? I think you are discovering judgment at an expensive time. Luca looked around Aurelia. The chandeliers were dark. Chairs rested upside down on tables. Beyond the glass, the river moved beneath winter fog. What remains? Matteo asked. The restaurant, the North Shipping Company, 3 construction projects with clean funding. And me. Luca looked at him. Matteo lifted his glass. You are not rid of me that easily. For the first time in days, Luca smiled. Evelyn chose a small apartment near Bloomfield. It had a narrow balcony, a yellow kitchen, and a bakery downstairs. She rejected the building Luca preferred because it had security guards at the entrance. I have lived with enough people deciding whether I may leave, she said. Grace helped her unpack. Luca carried boxes. Evelyn stood in the kitchen and watched him place dishes inside a cabinet. You put the cups too high. They are at eye level. Your eye level. Luca moved them down. Lower. He moved them again. Grace hid a smile. Evelyn pointed toward a cardboard box near the wall. Groceries. Luca carried it to the counter. You were more agreeable when you were terrifying, Evelyn said. I am still terrifying. Not while holding canned peaches. Grace laughed. Luca looked at her. The sound no longer surprised him, but it still changed the room. When they finished, Evelyn placed the black notebook inside a drawer beside the stove. Grace looked at it. Dana may need that again. She has copies. You should keep it somewhere safe. Evelyn closed the drawer. This is safe. It contains evidence of murder. It also contains grocery lists on the last 6 pages. Luca looked at her. You wrote grocery lists in it? I ran out of paper. Grace sat beside her. What will you do now? Evelyn looked through the window at the street below. Something useful. A month later, she began attending meetings with families affected by abusive guardianship orders. She sat near the front and listened while attorneys used words that confused everyone else. Then she raised her hand. Say that again like the person losing her house is in the room. The attorneys learned quickly. Grace returned to Aurelia only twice a week. She had begun working with Dana's office as a medical consultant while considering whether to renew her nursing license. Luca never asked her to return to full-time service. He also never offered to solve her life with a check. The loan tied to her mother remained under review. Conrad's company had purchased it through an illegal collection arrangement, but the original documents were real. Grace still owed money. One evening she found Luca in the restaurant kitchen after closing. He was repairing the loose handle on a cabinet. She placed an envelope on the counter. What is this? He asked. Your attorney's report on my mother's loan. I sent it to you. You also included 3 options. Luca set down the screwdriver. 1 was a legal challenge. 1 was a negotiated settlement. Yes. The 3rd was for one of your companies to purchase the debt. He watched her carefully. I did not act on it. You wanted to. Yes. Why did you include it? Because it was an option. It was a way to own the problem. Luca looked at the cabinet handle. That is how I survived most of my life. I know. Grace leaned against the counter. I am not angry. That is new. I did not say I approved. Luca met her gaze. What will you do? The debt may be reduced because of the collection violations. I will pay the rest. You could spend years doing that. Then it will take years. He wanted to argue. Grace saw it. Ask. Luca drew a slow breath. May I help without buying the debt? How there is a victim's compensation petition connected to Vane's financial crimes. Your mother's loan was purchased to pressure you into returning Evelyn. That makes you part of the case. I am not taking money because Conrad threatened me. You would be recovering money taken through an illegal act. Grace considered. Would the fund be independent of you? Yes. Would other victims have equal access? Yes. Would you control it? No. She nodded. Then send me the application. Luca remained still. Grace smiled faintly. You can say you are learning. I would rather not ruin it. She turned to leave. Grace. She stopped. I miss you. The words were so unguarded that she did not know how to answer. Luca continued. I know that does not create an obligation. No, I know you have reasons to stay away. Yes. I wanted you to know. Grace looked at him across the kitchen where he had once burned soup while telling her stories about her father. I miss you too. Luca's expression changed. She lifted one hand. That is not permission to move faster. I know. Do you know? Grace laughed quietly. But I can learn, he said. Their relationship began without a declaration. They met for coffee in places Luca did not own. They walked through markets where no one lowered his voice when Luca entered. They sat beside Evelyn during legal meetings and listened to her correct everyone. Grace asked questions about Luca's businesses. He answered them. Sometimes the truth ended the evening early. He told her about gambling rooms, payments, threats, and men whose fear had made him wealthy. He did not describe himself as a victim of circumstance. Grace never asked him to become harmless. She asked him to become accountable. That difference mattered. One afternoon, they stood outside the federal courthouse after Luca completed another interview with Dana. Grace looked at the stone steps. "Are you going to prison? I do not know. You always say that like uncertainty is a personal insult." "It is." She touched the sleeve of his coat. "What are you afraid of losing time? With the businesses, with you." Grace looked away toward the traffic. "You do not have me yet." "I know. Then you cannot lose me. I can lose the possibility." She turned back. For a man who had spent most of his life hiding every vulnerable thing, Luca had become painfully direct. Grace stepped closer. "You are not waiting for me while continuing the same life." "No. You are changing your life because it needs to change." "Yes. Even if I leave." Luca did not hesitate. "Yes." Grace nodded. "That is the first answer that makes me want to stay." She kissed his cheek. Then she walked down the courthouse steps before he could ask for more. Spring came late to Pittsburgh. Snow disappeared from the riverbanks, leaving gray streets, wet stone, and the first green leaves along the hills. Grace enrolled in the courses required to renew her nursing license. On the first morning, she stood outside the training center for 20 minutes. Students passed her carrying notebooks and coffee. Through the glass doors, she could see a hallway too similar to the hospital where her mother died. Her hands became cold. She reached for her phone. Luca's name appeared near the top of the screen. She did not call. Instead, she opened the old letter from Thomas, now protected inside a clear sleeve. "Keep my little girl away from our life." Grace had spent years believing survival meant moving farther from every painful thing. Her father had died trying to give her a choice. She entered the building. The first week was difficult. The second was worse. She struggled with medication calculations she once knew without thinking. During clinical training, the sound of a ventilator sent her into a restroom where she pressed both hands against the sink until the room stopped moving. She told no one. Then she remembered what she had demanded from Luca. No lies. That evening she went to Aurelia. He found her sitting in the empty private room where Evelyn had first described Blackridge. "I nearly left the program today," she said. Luca sat across from her. "Why?" She told him. He listened without trying to repair the fear. When she finished, he asked, "What do you need?" Grace looked at him. "Sit here." So he did. An hour passed. He did not offer advice. He did not call an expert. He did not arrange a solution behind her back. When Grace stood to leave, she placed one hand against his face. "You are getting better at this. At silence, at not turning care into control." Luca turned his head and kissed her palm. Grace did not pull away. Conrad Vane's first hearing filled the federal courtroom. Families occupied every bench. Photographs of residents rested in laps and handbags. Margaret Ellis smiled from a faded picture taken in front of her brick house. Walter Keene stood beside a city bus in another. Conrad entered wearing a dark suit. No chains were visible. He looked toward the gallery as though expecting people to lower their eyes. They did not. Evelyn sat beside Grace. Luca remained several rows behind them with Matteo. The defense attorney challenged Evelyn's competency. He cited Dr. Crane's diagnosis and Blackridge records describing delusions, wandering, and memory loss. The prosecutor called Dr. Crane. She had entered a plea agreement. Her testimony began in a whisper. Conrad's attorney asked whether Evelyn had displayed confusion. Yes. Paranoia. Yes. Repeated questions. Yes. The defense attorney looked toward the jury. Then Mrs. Parker's notebook may contain misunderstandings produced by cognitive decline. Dr. Crane stared at the witness stand. No. The attorney paused. No, I never examined her before signing the first evaluation. The courtroom became still. Who prepared it? Conrad's office sent the language, and the later evaluations I copied the original conclusions. Why Dr. Crane looked toward the families? Because he paid me. The defense attorney returned to his table. Evelyn did not smile. She reached inside her bag and touched the edge of the black notebook. The evidence continued for weeks. Bank transfers, recorded calls, medication records, property sales. Cole testified from a hospital wheelchair, his shoulder still supported by a brace. He described Conrad's payments and his own decision to betray Luca. When asked why Luca had not killed him, Cole looked across the courtroom. He wanted a witness more than he wanted revenge. Conrad's attorney tried to use Luca's criminal history to discredit the entire case. Dana Cross answered by presenting records independently confirmed through banks, hospitals, insurance companies, and state archives. Luca's involvement had opened the door. The evidence stood without him. Conrad was denied release. Captain Pike entered a guilty plea to obstruction and corruption. Dr. Crane surrendered her medical license. Several guardians were charged with fraud and exploitation. Senator Malcolm Reddick resigned after recordings revealed that he had pressured state inspectors to delay investigations into vein facilities. None of it restored the dead. The family still left court carrying photographs. Justice arrived as documents, sentences, and empty chairs. Evelyn understood that better than anyone. She began keeping a second notebook. This one contained names of people who had been found. Ruth Donnelly reunited with Michael. Samuel Ward guardianship reversed. Helen Price pension restored. George Taylor's niece located. Beside each name, Evelyn wrote the date someone listened. Summer reached the city. Grace completed her required clinical hours at a rehabilitation center that treated elderly patients recovering from injury and neglect. She was good at the work, not because she always knew what to say, because she waited long enough for people to answer. One patient, a former steelworker named Frank, refused to eat after surgery. Other staff called him difficult. Grace sat beside him during lunch. What is wrong with the food? It is soft. You need soft food. It looks dead. Grace examined the tray. That is fair. She brought soup from the cafeteria and added pepper after checking his restrictions. Frank ate half the bowl. The following day, he asked whether she would return. That night, Grace told Luca about him over dinner. They sat at a small restaurant across town where Luca had no office, no private entrance, and no authority over the menu. He reminds me of Evelyn, Grace said. Does he insult you constantly? Then he does. Grace smiled. Luca reached across the table but stopped before touching her hand. She noticed. You can. He placed his fingers over hers. The gesture was simple. Months earlier, he would have taken her hand and assumed she wanted to be held. Now he waited. Grace intertwined their fingers. What happened with Dana today? She asked. The agreement is almost complete. What does almost mean? Financial penalties, continuing cooperation, supervision of the remaining companies, and criminal charges, some reduced. Some remain possible if I violate the agreement. Do you think that is fair? Luca looked down at their joined hands. Yes. Grace studied him. You would not have said that 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I believed consequences were things powerful men arranged for other people. She held his hand more tightly. The Holloway Parker Elder Justice Center opened in October. It occupied 2 renovated floors above a legal clinic near Bloomfield. The center offered independent medical reviews, emergency legal aid guardianship challenges, financial investigations, and temporary housing referrals. Grace insisted on outside financial oversight. Luca agreed. She insisted that his contribution come only from verified legal income. He agreed to that too. Evelyn insisted on choosing the chairs in the waiting room. No one challenged her. A framed copy of the black notebook's first page hung near the entrance. The original remained in Evelyn's desk. On opening day, reporters asked Grace why the center carried Thomas Holloway's name when he had never lived to see the work. Grace looked toward Luca, who stood at the back of the room. "My father believed protecting someone meant giving them a chance to choose their own life," she said. Evelyn proved that a person does not lose her voice simply because powerful people stop listening. She did not mention Luca. He was grateful. Some changes belong to the person making them, not to the audience watching. After the crowd left, Luca found Grace in the empty consultation room. Her nursing license hung on the wall. "You did it," he said. "We did some of it. You did this." Grace looked around the room. "I nearly quit 4 times. 5. She narrowed her eyes. "How do you know?" Evelyn told me. I told her those conversations were private. Evelyn does not recognize privacy as a legal concept. Grace laughed. Luca reached into his coat and removed a small velvet box. Her expression changed. "No, it is not what you think. That is exactly what men say before opening velvet boxes." He placed it on the desk. Grace opened it carefully. Inside was Thomas's St. Christopher medal, cleaned and repaired. The chain Grace wore had been a later replacement. This was the original chain recovered from Luca's locked drawer. "I thought the medal was mine." "It is. The chain was damaged the night he died." Grace lifted it. "You kept this?" "Yes." "Why did you not give it to me with the letter? I was not ready." She looked at him. "That is honest. I am trying." Grace removed the chain she wore and placed the medal on the original one. Her fingers struggled with the clasp. Luca stepped behind her. "May I?" "Yes." He fastened it gently. Grace turned. They stood close enough to hear one another breathe. "This is not repayment for my father," she said. "I know. It is not forgiveness for everything you have done. I know. And I will leave if you become the man you were." Luca looked at her without defense. "Then I will give you reasons to stay without ever asking you to." Grace kissed him. There were no guns in the room. No one was running. No debt demanded the moment. The kiss began carefully, then deepened with everything they had refused to rush. When they separated, Grace rested her forehead against his. "You are still difficult. So are you. That was not permission to insult me. I will ask next time." 1 year after Evelyn walked into Aurelia Snow returned to Pittsburgh. The storm was lighter, but the city looked almost the same beneath it. Aurelia remained elegant. Crystal glasses shone beneath amber chandeliers. The pianist played near the fireplace. Politicians still ate beside developers. Men with old loyalties still lowered their voices when Luca entered. But one table near the kitchen was always kept open. A small sign rested upon it. "No one leaves hungry. Ask for the house soup." Grace entered through the front doors wearing navy scrubs beneath her winter coat. Luca stood behind the bar reviewing invoices for the North Shipping Company. He looked up as she approached. "You are late. I had a patient who believed the blood pressure machine was stealing his thoughts. Was it? I am still investigating." She kissed his cheek. At the corner table, Evelyn corrected a young attorney's guardianship appeal with a red pen. "This sentence says nothing she told him. It explains the jurisdiction. It explains that you attended law school." The attorney removed the page. The front door opened. Cold wind crossed the dining room. An older man stood inside wearing a military coat faded nearly gray. Snow clung to his beard. A canvas bag hung from one shoulder. He looked at the chandeliers, then at the white tablecloths, then at the polished shoes of the man nearest him. He began to turn around. Grace approached. "Can I help you?" The man opened his hand. A few coins rested in his palm. "I do not know if this is enough." Grace closed his fingers gently. "It is." She led him to the open table. Luca watched from behind the bar. He did not call the manager. He did not announce an order. He did not turn the moment into proof of his goodness. Grace brought the man wedding soup, warm bread, and coffee. He stared at the bowl for several seconds before lifting the spoon. Evelyn watched him from across the room. Then she closed her red pen. She walked slowly toward the bar. Luca saw the coins in her hand. She placed them on the marble one at a time. 3 quarters, several dimes, nickels, 4 pennies. Luca looked down. "I told you the soup was free." It was. "Then why are you paying me? I am not." Evelyn arranged the coins with one finger. $3.14. Luca looked toward the veteran. "Whose soup is it for the next person?" Evelyn rested both hands on the bar. "The next person who walks through that door believing hunger is something to be ashamed of." Grace stepped beside Luca and slipped her hand into his. Evelyn returned to her table. The pianist began another song. Outside, snow covered the river, the warehouses, the courthouse, and the hill where Black Ridge had once stood. Inside, the veteran broke warm bread over a bowl of soup. Luca looked at the coins beneath the amber light. 13 years earlier, Thomas Holloway had believed Luca could still choose what kind of man he would become. 1 year earlier, Elena Parker had crossed a frozen city carrying $3.14 because she had no safer place to go. The amount had not purchased a bowl of soup. It had opened a door. It had placed a forgotten name in front of a man who could no longer look away. Luca picked up 1 penny. Grace rested her head briefly against his shoulder. The restaurant door remained unlocked. $3, 1 dime, 4 pennies. It was almost nothing. It was enough to begin.